Now, for today's session, I'm really thrilled to be joined by one of our 2024 inductees to the BC Innovators Hall of Fame, Boris Wertz. I always love to hear my guests' story in their own words. So perhaps you could sort of take us back to the beginning of your career and just share a little bit more with your audience about how that trajectory unfolded.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in the end, many things in life are kind of sometimes lucky break. And I think my lucky break was in '99 when kind of there was the first time the internet really came to, got to some scale with the internet bubble. And I felt like I had to be part of that story. And I got together with a few other founders to start Just Books, this marketplace for used rare out of print books, which at the time felt like a really tiny idea compared to many other companies that got started at that very moment that looked for a much bigger market and much bigger opportunity. But ultimately it proved out that a marketplace for these hard to find books was a real internet native business model, meaning it was really something that was not possible before to connect on the one side all of these booksellers and tens and later hundreds of millions of unique books to buyers all across the world. And what was before a local economy, you had to go to each individual bookstore or to a book fair, etc., suddenly became this really international global marketplace and had a really powerful business model, right? And so that's really when my journey in tech started. And from there, obviously through lots of ups and downs as an entrepreneur, as that normally is, ended up selling this company Just Books to 8 Books based in Victoria, BC. That made me come over to Canada, continue to grow that business for 5 years until we sold it to Amazon. The time we sold it was about a quarter of a billion in top line volume that was run through that marketplace. So I've got mid-size and sold it to Amazon. To this day, like 8 Books is a standalone company thriving under the ownership of Amazon. But I felt I wanted to switch to the other side and start investing, and first did it kind of on my own account, pretty much taking the proceeds I had picked up from the Amazon sale and reinvested in other technology startups and learning the ropes of investing along the way until I felt like I was ready to make that kind of my full-time job and started working on venture. Today we are on our fourth fund, which is a $17 million USD early stage fund, investing across North America in literally anything that we find interesting. So a very generous approach, always at the early stages. So creativity, 2 partners, and having lots of fun in this investing journey, and continue to invest both locally as well as across North America for the foreseeable future.
Excellent. Well, that's quite the journey. I have to tell you that 8 Books is one of my favorite shopping sites still today.
It is nice to hear and hear almost on a weekly basis how many people have used 8 Books over the years and have your fond memories of that.
Absolutely. So now you're an investor. You say you're on the fourth fund at version one. I know this is the number one question that all of my startups would want me to ask you. So, what are the key, most important factors that you look at when you're making an investment decision?
Yeah. So obviously, first, I think you need to set some context, right? I mean, we're investing at the very, very early stages, so pre-seed and seed. That's usually where there's only a team, sometimes an early product, but certainly in most of the cases, not yet any product market fit or any revenue or anything like that, right? And so when we invest, there's not many proof points around the business itself, right? I think secondly, the second piece of context that is really important to set is venture, and especially early stage venture, is an outlier business. right? So the way we think about it, we have a portfolio of 25 to 30 within a fund, and a third of those will unfortunately not go anywhere. Right? They never find product market fit. A third of those have to pay back the money that they invest in other investors invested, but kind of not create any meaningful return. And the last third will really scale and go on to potentially be a fellow company, et cetera, right? And so, but even out of that third that does very well, there's really only a handful, 2 or 3 out of each fund that go on and provide a 50, 100x to the initial investment and really drive all of the returns. So there's really 2 or 3 companies that drive 90% of the returns in a fund. Um, and these are really outlier companies that um, broke through some of the tough uh, science of building a startup. And usually that happens when you're early in a big wave, right? If you were building a vertical SaaS company in 2010, you were early in a big wave where there's tons of verticals were still available to go after. If you were building something in crypto in 2015, 2016, you're really early in that wave, right? Um, if you started in kind of building an AI in 1920, right, you were really early in the AI. And so the way we think about it, given that these 2 pieces of context, like, first of all, you need to have an outstanding founder team, passionate about the problem they're solving, um, in for the long term, um, kind of really trying to understand every single detail of the business, working obviously incredibly hard. The special founder team, but also a special founder team that works in an area that is very early and what we think is becoming a really big wave, right? And um, if you today started a vertical SaaS business, right? It doesn't mean that you couldn't succeed. It's certainly much harder to succeed in a big way today than it was 10 years ago, when there wasn't as much competition, when you were ahead of the pack of everyone. So that's really the 2 things we're looking for at these mission-driven founders on the one side, working in an area that feels like early in a large wave, early in a large S curve that is about to come.
Right. So those are the two key things, really, the founder team and the market opportunity, and how early you are, as you say. Interesting.
Correct.
So
Yeah, correct.
um, now what I hear from members all the time, and certainly in the last 18 months, has been how challenging it is to raise capital. But, it for every one member that tells me how challenging it is, I also have others saying, yeah, but I'm optimistic about what's coming next, and what's around the corner. Share with us your perspective on the last 18 months, and looking to the future.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would think about it is obviously, I mean, there's a few things going on, right? From 2010 on, I think there was more and more capital available over the years as I think investors and in the LPs, the investors that actually give venture capitalists the money, got more and more convinced that there's actually a much larger underlying market opportunity there, right? And so, 2010, there were, for example, very few seed funds that micro VC was only a handful when we started version one. Today, there's literally hundreds of those, right? And so, so we started kind of the expansion of the capital availability since the 2010s, right? And it obviously accelerated in a big way during COVID, and this whole zero interest rate phenomenon. Everybody thought, kind of, we pull forward digitalization, and everybody can grow much quicker, and obviously that ultimately more capital was flowing into it. And then, kind of after all of that, went sideways with interest rates that went up. I think they had a really tough time in the last 18 to 24 months where people were pulling back. Now, I think we're certainly finding the bottom of that, and I feel like a stabilization in the market. Um, But I don't think it's realistic to think that the heydays of 2020, 21 will come back. Right? Venture was overfunded relative to the amount of startups that can actually produce venture returns. And so we'll see a bunch of funds going out of business. We see, and we're already seeing it, a bunch of funds that have scaled their fund sizes very dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years, cutting down fund sizes again. And I think we're going to go back to a new normal that looks much more like the normal between 2015 and 2020 than 2020 and 21.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. So important to think of 2021 as the outlier and not get too anchored in that, and realize that they're quite advanced now into this area of investment being well established with lots
Yeah.
of.
And by the way, I think one other point that is really, really important to say, there's 2 points, right? The first one is, I think getting venture fundable is not a strategy per se, right? I sometimes feel like there's some entrepreneurs that are so focused on getting venture funding that they miss the bigger point of like, what problem do you care about solving, and what's the right brand and strategy to solve that problem? And sometimes the reality is you might solve an important problem, but the size of the underlying problem is not large enough, right, for a venture capital funding model, right? Coming back to what I said before, where I need to fund outliers, companies can grow super, super fast. We're not interested in kind of a 2 or 3x, right? And neither are most of the other VCs, right? And so I think it's important to kind of put that into context. There's many other ways to fund a company, be it from customers through revenues, be it sometimes through debt solutions, right? And be it by strategic investment from corporates that are interested in that area. So sometimes I feel like an entrepreneur should really kind of look into the first principle, kind of how should you fund your startup, and VC is only one of the options.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's grounded in the business fundamentals of what you're building. In some cases, venture is the answer, but bootstrapping, strategic investment, even debt, as you're saying, could well be the right approach for your business. So, um, now, one of the things we're quite excited about, of course, is to welcome you into the Innovators Hall of Fame, TS Gala, in just 13 days. I frightened myself by noting. But I'd love to hear your perspective when you look around at BC's tech ecosystem and how it's changed in the time that you've been participating in it, and what you think the strengths are for today, and the opportunity for the future.
And first of all, BC has a long history of bringing out amazing companies in very different areas, right? Back to semiconductors, kind of some of the earliest mobile software. We had a bunch of really successful SaaS companies. We had a bunch of really successful crypto companies. And we obviously have an amazing biotech area. So, I think there's a long-standing path of innovation and BC for decades. And I don't think that will ever stop. There's many smart and hardworking people in BC, and many that get attracted to move here, right? And so I think we will see more of those success stories over the years, and whatever new technology the wave will be. I think where we can do a better job is actually to systematize the success, right? I think right now it feels like these great companies kind of emerge despite the lack of a system, right? Despite the kind of a thriving ecosystem. I think it's a solid ecosystem, but it's not a thriving ecosystem, right? And one of the things that I've really gotten to appreciate over the last 2 years is like how much really the pandemic and going to remote work has hurt ecosystems like Vancouver and cities in general. Right? But it feels like the in-person connection, and we're already relatively weak beforehand relative to the San Francisco and the Bay Area, right, which is always much denser, and out flagged that being weaker over that period of time. And I think we all have to kind of think about how we can bring that magic back. It feels like obviously Greater Vancouver is a large area. You know, have people on the North Shore, you have downtown, and on the west side, and the east side, and Richmond, and Surrey, and it feels like we need to kind of figure out again, you know, what could be a center, right, where people meet, bump into each other, exchange experiences, make connections, etc. And so I really hope that we find better ways, literally physical locations where this can happen in a much stronger way going forward.
I think that's really wise. I mean, yeah, we know we've got the ingredients for success. We see companies succeeding here, but we also know that there's something missing in the water in that system. I think that system approach and making sure that the infrastructure supports entrepreneurs and provides those mechanisms for creating strong connections rather than weak connections is so key. Um, so when you think about how we could do more or why people don't realize their potential, do you see any pattern either in Canada or in British Columbia? Is there anything that you would say, gosh, if we could learn from somewhere else in the world, I'd love to inject some of that to our local companies?
Yeah, listen, I think it's for me, it's really two things, right? I mean, the first one is um, everyone needs to have examples and role models that they can look up to and say, hey, listen, this is possible from where I'm from, this is possible in this area, this is possible in this city, etc. And so I think you guys, obviously, with a Hall of Fame, are doing a great job in highlighting these examples and highlighting these role models, right? But I think in general, we need to have more of those things, right? And celebrate successes and show people what is possible. I think the second thing is just um, in me, like when you look at the valley, I think the pay forward culture and the risk culture is much higher than in any other tech ecosystem. And that's not even like um, just BC. Right? So you see the same thing in Seattle, you see the same thing in New York, you see the same thing in Toronto, Waterloo. Um, it just it has been a decade long building up of a culture of risk taking, of paying forward, and that just accelerates everything. Like it accelerates the early stage funding round. It accelerates introduction to a key employee. It accelerates um, later on an acquisition because people have seen how it can work out if you a take risk, suddenly, secondly, pay it forward, and that just becomes like this really ingrained entrepreneurship culture, right? That is hard to replicate in an ecosystem that just hasn't seen as many of these successes, right? And doesn't yet have the density of these risk embracing, paid forward people, investors, or entrepreneurs. And so I really hope we can move in that direction over the years.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. It's not just about the startups and the entrepreneurs, it's also about the investors and seeing that thrive and investors seeing role models like yourself who are building for the future, paying it forward.
And also, listen, even employees, right? I think one of the things I'm always astonished about, right, when one of our Canadian recruiting companies hires employees, is very little appreciation for stock options. It always like the message is like, well, I get my salary, that's what I'm counting on. The stock option might or might not be something worth. That is generally true, right? But I think if you looked at the employees in the valley, they would always say maximize my stock options because if it's going to work out, it's going to be a generational wealth creation event for me, and I want to maximize my chances, right? that's just a different attitude as well. So I think like everyone, the entrepreneur, the investors, as well as kind of key employees, need to kind of change their mindset in that way.
I agree. That was one of the things that struck me most on moving from California to here was the constant dialogue that I had about options and the almost complete ignorance about the potential value of options here. It really told a story of how people think of the future and creating wealth. So it's interesting. I have seen great progress over the years, but even so, it's we're not quite as fluent in that language as I think we would need to be. So I'm going to turn to the audience again and just encourage you, please do raise your questions in the chat or live. I'm going to come to you in a moment. But before I do that, I'll just close with my final question for Boris, which is we've got a lot of startups on the line and they're starting out and they'd love to be where you are one day. Do you have one piece of advice? What words of encouragement can you offer?
I think it's a very simple piece of advice. Just do it, right? I think sometimes just be in the game, start executing, start building, start talking to customers, start selling. Like sometimes I feel like I see too many times people thinking about it, writing a business plan, considering different options. Sometimes saying, "Hey, I'm only going to do it. It's going to raise money," and then investors say, "Well, I'm only going to fund you if you do it." Like sometimes just if you're really about something, just going to do it, and don't wait for anyone or anything to kind of give you the permission to do it. Right? The best thing is once you start executing and working on the problem, you're going to learn very quickly. New opportunities will come up. Don't wait to have all the opportunities lined up. Just start working on it, right? And it sometimes feels daunting, right? Because you want to have some security around things being lined up, co-founder or funding or a key customer or whatever it is. But it's good and just start working.
Yeah, just get going. Just do it.
Right.
So great question in the chat from Gokhan who's saying, amidst the current hype of AI, where do you see that heading and which startups do you think are going to emerge as leaders in the next generation?
Very good question. So first of all, I would say AI is one of the most exciting technologies that we've seen for a long time, right? And it's going to have an incredible impact on the world of technology, on the world in general. And I think we're just at the very, very early stages of that, right? Now, the biggest challenge right now is both for operators as well as investors, like, what can you actually build? Like, where will value accrue? What are like, where are areas where you can actually differentiate, right? And what we see right now is two things. A, foundational models uh, evolving very, very quickly, right? And it sometimes feels a little bit like quicksand if you're an entrepreneur. You just don't know what kind of the status quo will be as progress will slow down in these areas. And then secondly, lots of startups going after the same obvious ideas. Right? Uh, customer service, for example, is obviously a obvious idea in terms of kind of automating that with AI. And we have a portfolio company in that space that has been around for 10 years now. Does fantastically well, ADA support. But they have been probably about 20 new companies going after that in just in the last 12 months, right? Like most of them will not even make it, but I'm just saying, like right now, it's tough to find the overlooked areas where you can build as an entrepreneur without kind of being kind of bombarded with competitors right away. Right? And so the way we think about it as Word One is we haven't been investing very aggressively in AI in the last 24 months because we felt they were too busy, the valuations were too high, there was too much capital flowing into that sector. But we're excited about about thinking about what are AI native ideas? What are the ideas that were only possible with AI? Because lots of the ideas you see right now are basically automating something with AI that already exists, right? And that certainly kind of will have some efficiency gains, but I'm not quite sure like that is a really interesting area. And sometimes new technology just takes some time to figure it out. And, when you go back to the internet, um, a lot of the ideas that in coming back to the internet bubble in 99, 2000, like that were created at that time didn't survive, right? There's literally from that period, it's only Amazon and eBay that survived, but most of these other models kind of died. And many others came later, like Google came way later, Facebook came way later, right? And so sometimes it's not necessarily all the companies that start out with a technology wave that make it as latecomers that build then on infrastructure that has been developed in the first 2 years that become the big winner.
So staying with AI, I've got a question from Martin in the chat, which is, what are your thoughts on the protection of personal and corporate data as these new generative AI SaaS apps need it to provide their services?
And so the first one was like, what around data, the privacy part?
What are your thoughts around the protection of
Oh,
personal and corporate data?
yeah, I think it's a big question. So first of all, I think to me, it feels like the chatter about that in media is much larger than what users and companies feel. On the user side, I think we have been many, many times pitched the idea of data marketplace where users can actually use their data, okay, sell that data, right, and benefit from the selling, right? Which is a certain way, like the protection side part, but any monetize it. And there wasn't really not much interest in that. Actually have an investment on the on the company side for encrypting data across AI models, and it hasn't really seen a big pickup either, right? And so um, I feel like often it gets overblown when people think about the data protection both on consumer and companies. Often people are much more open to sharing data. But I think big companies, big platforms have to get better in kind of recognizing what data is being shared, how it's being used, etc. And companies will find models to monetize their data and kind of, protect it for kind of really unique processes where they think they have an advantage.
That's great. I think it ties back to your previous point as well. It's like the applications that emerge that are native to AI that can happen without AI. Once those outcomes and those results become apparent, then people are in a better position to assess the trade-offs, right? So all of us are feeling very protective of our data until a books or the equivalent says to us, if you liked this book, you might like this other book. And we say, oh, this is amazing perk of using this software, which is,
Yeah,
of course, just
correct.
harvesting our data. So I do have a question from Daniel direct to me, which is saying, what are your views on the usefulness of non-dilutive sources of financing? So he's using the example of superclusters, but you could think of other kinds of grant funding. What role can that play, and how can you be realistic about the sales cycle to get access to those rather than other sources of capital?
Yeah, I mean, two takes of that. I mean, the first one is from a government point of view and budget point of view. I'm not a big fan of these things. Just it feels like government takes kind of winner, and that's always a little tough. Um, from the company point of view, listen, it always depends a little bit on your options. I think any funding that comes with strings attached of where you have to spend your time, how you spend your time, the reporting that goes along, right? Like obviously the best case scenario is always you have capital and you spend it what you think is the best use of time, right? And what kind of area you want to spend it in, right? So now if you don't have any other option, obviously, like this is a company, your company, and you try to kind of like keep it afloat, so go for it. But I think to this date, I think like the best non-dilutive funding option is Shred. And it's very simple. It's very straightforward. It doesn't really kind of tell you where to spend your money as long as kind of developing product, right? And so that feels to me like the most straightforward way, both in terms of where the government spends their money, because ultimately it's like a private company has taken the decision where to best allocate capital, and then I give them a subsidy after the fact. That is pretty straightforward. Versus all these programs where I have to apply, somebody help me where I have to spend my time, what is interesting, etc. Right? And so I think like I would love to see Shred being scaled up more, versus any other programs that could feel like much more administrative and complex.
I'm glad to hear you be so strongly positive about the Shred program. Every entrepreneur that I talk to is a real fan, and we want to protect that program and grow it, because, as you say, it's a great model for incenting the right kinds of investment. Raf is asking a question in the chat. What are some of the common mistakes that you see founders make that get in the way of their success?
Yeah, I mean, um, listen, there's, there's, there's many mistakes you can make along the way. It usually starts with picking the wrong co-founder, right? A co-founder that is not fully committed to the business, a co-founder that perhaps it doesn't have the same work ethic as you, co-founder that might have very different values than you have. So that's where it really starts. Um, I think the second thing you often see is just it's very tough as an entrepreneur with to kind of find the right balance between short-term success and long-term success, short-term thinking and long-term thinking. Right? And sometimes you have to kind of think short-term just to guarantee the survival of your company, but ultimately you will never build a big company if you don't have conviction in your long-term opportunity, the thing that really makes this work, right? And you can't take too many compromises short term. Um, Third one is probably around hiring people, right? I think um, we all have always been there. Like we hired somebody, you thought was great, so then this person doesn't work out to be great, and we kind of fear letting them go. And we drag it on. We think we can turn them around. We think we can develop them into a great employee. And sometimes, often, you just have to say, listen, you made a hire mistake, move on, let that person go, move on, hire somebody else, and hopefully better. Right? So that's some of the mistakes, right? But I think that the most important thing is, as an entrepreneur, most of the entrepreneurs are first-time entrepreneurs. We've never seen it before, right? Um, so starting to develop your own instinct about what is the right decision and at different phases and different at different points, right? And trusting that intuition, trusting those instincts, right? Um, there is no playbook for any company. Um, the only one that ultimately can call the shots is you as a founder, right? Nobody else can do that for you, and you just have to be in a confident that you develop the right instincts over time and trust those instincts.
That's great advice. Prashant is asking a really interesting question in the chat. So I'm going to ask the second part first. So he's saying, what are the top three things you look for? But I'm more interested in the second part of the question. What are your top three pet peeves or reasons you would decide not to invest? So are there any red flags that people show up with that are a negative indicator?
Yeah. So I think there's three pet peeves I have. The first one is if somebody uses lots of buzzwords, if somebody has a very long deck without saying much substantive, I have a red flag. The best businesses are very simple, and the entrepreneur needs to work really hard to create a simple narrative. You should be able to tell any startup story in 6 to 8 slides and with a paragraph that you share with it, right? And so the more the more fluff there is, the more buzzwords there are, um, the less substance there is usually, right? And so that's the first red flag. I think the second red flag is somebody that talks about a potential exit in the deck or in the conversation, right? We are interested in funding entrepreneurs that are on a 10 to 15 year, 20-year journey, right? Building a large standalone company. And if you tell us, I want to sell this company and these are the potential acquirers, then you're just not in for the long run, right? Plus, to be honest, it's also wrong instinct because nobody ever knows who will buy this company. Uh, like often happens, perhaps not. So don't even spend time thinking about it. But so that's a second red flag. I think the third red flag for us is people that are trying to use deadlines and pressure on the company on the within the funding round to create some urgency. Yeah, for us, we're first principle investor. We're high conviction investor. Either we have a conviction or we don't have the conviction, but we certainly don't get conviction because somebody else is funding it or somebody else put out a term sheet. That's just, and if you feel like you need to use these things, then you probably just like kind of not the kind of entrepreneur that we're looking for. So that's kind of the three red flags. I would say the first two are certainly more general red flags that most other VCs probably would mention. The last one is perhaps more like a style point for how we think about investing and partnering with entrepreneurs.
That's great. Um, so another question, back to sort of the political and the policy realm. So Hamid is saying with both provincial and potentially federal elections in the next year or so on the horizon, how do you see the evolving policies and regulations in Canada that might impact the tech sector? So, what specific changes would you love to see? What initiatives would you love to see? Is there anything you'd like to see less of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one, I think I have to say, like I worked 6 to 7 years ago with the federal government on a few of these roundtables. And I got some real insight around how tough it is to actually come up with a policy that works for people. Um, so yeah, I have like the hugest respect for the limitations you have, budget wise, priority wise, what you can actually kind of put together. So from that point, I want to say that there's no easy solution to any of that. Right? But when I think about generally where I see the opportunity is like for me, and that might be kind of the version one view of the world, but it all starts with talent. Right? And talent is we need entrepreneurs that have these great ideas and go out to realize them and execute against them. Right? And the two levers are on the one hand side, obviously celebrating entrepreneurship here in Canada for people that are already here, having great university education, and making sure that we have a constant pipeline of entrepreneurs that come out of that, right? And so in that hindsight, like through that angle, like obviously the increasing capital gains taxes that just got introduced and end of June wasn't really helpful because it sent the message of well, you might be successful, but let's get more of that money for the government. Just a small example, but that's what I mean in terms of like just celebrating entrepreneurship. I think the second thing is then bringing talent into Canada, right? And I think the federal government has actually done a really good job in that regard. In the last little while with startup visa, with these accelerated visas for key employees, etc. But I think we need to do more. I mean, I hope that Canada can brand itself as a top tier destination for entrepreneurs from around the world. So they decide to build here. Um, Now, I think on a provincial and federal level, one other thing that I hear continuously is obviously and especially in BC, cost of living, right? And so it's not necessarily specific to tech, but obviously the higher the cost of living, the harder it is for startups to thrive, to attract employees that can afford to live in BC. And so I hope that more progress will be made on that front. Um, and kind of that would really help. Not only tech, but obviously the whole economy. And then I think the third one is kind of on the capital side. I think that the federal government has done a great job with that BCAP program or now BK program in terms of providing additional capital for venture capital funds. I think it's not only a great investment for the government because it looks like all of the money will come back with a great return, but it certainly has created a much more stable and thriving local VC ecosystem in Canada. So hopefully that will just be continued, right? So uh, long story short, I think um, overall there's very little that can be done in the overall scheme of things. Uh, but if I would focus on it is like talent, um, affordability, and then last but not least, continue with that the capital incentives that were created in the past.
And to adopt the Hippocratic oath of first do no harm.
That's very true. That's very true.
Wonderful. Well, so Lisa, thank you so much. Thank you to my audience for some wonderful, wonderful questions.